I was about 4 or 5 years old, and my parents had just separated. My mom was living in a two-bedroom apartment. I had my own room, but I preferred to sleep in her bed whenever I was staying with her. Our two bedrooms were at the end of a hallway, directly across from each other. Our apartment was on the first floor, and I remember that it was in the middle of the summer and my mom had a window open in her room, which was directly behind the bed, above the headboard. Anyways, I woke up in the middle of the night and remember sitting up and seeing that our cat was sitting in the door frame of my mom's room. Her door was open and you could partially see into my bedroom. This was strange because our cat was typically always in bed with us. As I was watching him, he walked into my bedroom and meowed. I turned to face my mom and wake her up. In the 3 or 4 seconds it took her to wake up and ask me what was wrong, we both looked back up in the door frame, and there was a man standing by my open door, making his way out of my bedroom. I still don't know how she managed to do it so quickly, but my mother proceeded to pick me up and literally throw me out of the screen window. Again, we were on the first floor, and it was maybe a 3-foot drop to the ground. She quickly followed, and we were able to start screaming for help, and someone called 911. The police came but didn't see any signs of forced entry, only that our front door was unlocked, which led them to believe the man must have exited that way. The strange thing was that my mom swore up and down that she had locked the door that night with the deadbolt and chain lock. About a week later, she was cleaning the kitchen and opened up our water heater closet and found a notebook with names and drawings, as well as a pair of gloves and some gum wrappers. The police were called again, but all they could do was speculate that the man had been in our house and hid until we were asleep. For my grandmother's entire life, she had a recurring nightmare. In this nightmare, she would be walking down a long, dark hallway, turn to the left, open a door, and see something terrible. She'd always wake up before seeing what it was. In her 40s, she, her husband, my dad, and my aunt were on vacation. They booked the hotel at the last minute, so they ended up having to get 2 rooms with 2 twin beds on opposite sides of the floor. My dad wakes up around 3 a.m. and can automatically tell something's not right. He calls out in the darkness to his dad. No response. He turns on the bedside light. "Dad," he says, a little louder this time. Still no response. Getting worried, he slides out of bed and shakes his father. He doesn't wake up. My dad ran down the hotel hallway to my grandma's room and started banging on the door. My grandma worriedly opens the door, and my dad shouts, "Something's wrong with Dad." He leads her down the hallway, a long hallway, to the last door on the left. My grandmother reaches the door, turns to the left, and sees her husband dead in bed from a heart attack. She never had the dream again. I grew up in a funeral home. I helped out in the office. When I was about 15, we got a call from a man whose wife and infant baby had been murdered in cold blood. There were very few clues. It made headlines. Cops set up surveillance at the viewing. It was heartbreaking as the mother was holding the baby in her arms. I was asked to take the flower cards and periodically get the husband and ask if he recognized the names. I then photocopied them and put them back. I did it because I was a kid, people knew me, and I was unobtrusive. I talked to the husband quite a bit. He seemed devastated and shaken. The cops told me they had an eyewitness to someone leaving the house the day of the murder. The witness was a 3-year-old girl. She recognized the man leaving. It was the husband's best friend. Turns out that the friend and the husband had made a pact to kill each other's families and run off with their secretaries. The little girl identified the friend, and I guess one of them cracked. They both went to jail on multiple counts, all on the testimony of a 3-year-old. I still cannot believe to this day that that man stood right beside me multiple times, and I had NOCLUE. I don't think I ever looked at life the same way after that. When I was 10, I regularly attended a choir club for kids. One day, I was picked up by my dad to drive me home. I was confused about it, as it was always my mom who did, but did not think much on it until halfway through the drive. My dad began to mumble about how sorry he was, and how I would never see him again. More than a bit frightened and confused at that point, I kept asking what he meant, but he wouldn't say. Until we were home, but he did not leave the car, and instead urged me to get out. Finally, he told me I would not see him again because he will be dead very soon for what he did, and that the police would answer me. After he practically kicked me out of the car, I rushed home, but no one was there. But I found the door open and a puddle of blood on the floor. The police was nearby and explained what had happened. My dad was obsessively jealous and had found a pack of old condoms in the cupboard, so he drew the conclusion that my mom must have cheated on him. Never mind the fact that we only recently moved into this apartment and they could have been left by previous tenants, or the fact that he controlled my mom's very step and never let her go anywhere alone. The police took me to the hospital where my mom, luckily alive, was being treated. My dad had smashed her skull in with a full wine bottle. The only reason she survived was because my little brother, 7 at the time, intervened. If it weren't for him, my dad would have killed my mom in a fit of jealousy. When he said that I would not see him again, he meant that he had planned on killing himself shortly after dropping me off. He did not succeed, and police managed to get him into a mental ward. This, to this date, is the scariest thing that had ever happened to me, but I keep thinking of my brother all the time. To witness your own mom being beaten half dead by your dad. We both suffered extreme mental trauma from this event later down the line, but somehow turned into decent people. I never really told him how grateful I am he was there, but I think that I really should. Despite what my mom went through, she is the most cheerful and sweetest woman I have ever known. It takes real strength to come out of such an abusive marriage and continue to live your life in such a positive way, and also raise her 2 children alone. Another woman fell in love with my great-grandfather, and he was already married to my great-grandmother. One day the women came to their home with a gun while he was at work. When my great-grandmother opened the door, she shot her point blank. However, my grandmother, who was 3 years old, was behind her, watching everything. I guess she concluded that she wouldn't remember, or wouldn't be believed, or simply couldn't shoot a child, being a mother herself, and thankfully didn't shoot her. This was around 1930. Forensics weren't very advanced. No evidence was left. The case goes cold. Life continued on, and eventually the woman, named Lorraine, got what she wanted. She convinced my great-grandfather to marry her. She had 2 children from a previous marriage, both older than my grandmother. I don't know what happened to her first husband, honestly. My great-grandmother told everyone exactly who murdered her mother, but no one believed her. Who would believe a kid who obviously misses her mother and is having trouble adjusting to her new family? People just thought she demonized her stepmother for replacing her mom. Or maybe imagined it. It's an easy conclusion to reach, honestly. And so years and years pass. She grows up with her mother's murderer in her own house, sleeping rooms away. And Lorraine knows that she knows. She appears like the perfect housewife, swooping in and caring for the grieving father and child. My grandmother grows up tormented by her and her children. There was obvious favoritism. The stepkids are spoiled, and she's the black sheep of the family. She moves out and marries my grandfather the first chance she gets. She moves on and has children of her own. 5 boys. Lorraine became ill and finally landed on her deathbed. And there, she finally confessed to the truth and told everyone what she had done. I guess she was worried about the state of her soul. 57 years had passed since the murder. 16 since my great-grandfather had passed. He never knew the truth. No documents were ever officially amended to state that she was the murderer, as far as I know. The authorities consider the case cold. Still, almost 100 years later. It drives me nuts that my grandmother always knew. And even after she was an adult, people just said, "Oh, you had an active imagination as a child." There's no way to live with that knowledge for so long and have no one in the world on your side. Your whole family against you. That's what scares me.